We are going to be answering some terrific, fascinating questions today on The Line of Fire. Hey, friends, welcome to the Friday edition of The Line of Fire. You've got questions, we've got answers. This is Michael Brown, but it's one of those rare Fridays where I'm not taking your call. I know I can feel the sigh, but unfortunately, I cannot do a live radio show at the same time that I am in flight overseas. So this is a travel day to Israel, then to meet up with our tour group who'll be coming in just a little bit after me for a wonderful time. Those of you on the tour group, if you're actually hearing this, I cannot wait to meet you in the land of Israel. And God willing, next week we'll be doing live broadcasts, some, most, all of the nights we shall see from the land of Israel, even bringing our tour group in. Those are really fun, special programs as long as we're able to make our connections and do this properly. But I have solicited questions on Facebook. Any question or even an area of difference where someone wanted to get clarification. So I see the questions before us. This is going to be a really, really interesting episode broadcast on The Line of Fire. So don't post questions on Facebook now. I have already solicited them, and I am answering them now on this broadcast. So we'll start with a question from Ruth. Dr. Brown, I've just begun to read the book of Enoch. My question is, have you read it? And if so, is there a particular translation of it that you would recommend? Thank you so much for hopefully answering. Yeah, well, you were one of the first to post your question, Ruth, so of course we'll answer. Now, when it comes to Enoch, I have read parts of Enoch. I have not read all of the book of Enoch. And even the book of Enoch, as we have it, is not preserved completely in a very early form. So as far as, and then there are additional, there's Enoch 1, Enoch 2, as far as different books within Enoch. And the earliest evidence we have is from Dead Sea Scrolls in Aramaic. That was not available to previous scholars. Otherwise, the only complete text we have of Enoch is a translation from Aramaic into Ethiopic, or from another language into Ethiopic. So it is secondary. So we don't have the original book of Enoch, or we don't have the original language book of Enoch, even copies of that, except for fragments at the Dead Sea Scrolls. As far as translations, the old classic translation was R.H. Charles. He worked, and this is one that he edited. He produced a famous edition of Old Testament pseudepigrapha. So these were external writings falsely attributed to others, etc. That remains in print and available. So the R.H. Charles edited one. There is a detailed critical study of Enoch with translation by Matthew Black, a top Aramaic scholar. That volume I bought many years ago when I was doing some research and study. It's not a cheap volume, by the way. And again, it's going to have technical information. And then George Nicholsberg and others have produced a new critical edition of Enoch with a commentary in the book of Enoch, now in a couple of volumes in the Hermeneia series. That's expensive and technical. But in short, just remember you're reading an ancient book that was influential in the early church and early Judaism, but ultimately was not considered canonical. So it never became part of the canonical scriptures in Judaism or in Christianity. Of course, they overlap at the beginning fully. So it was never considered canonical, should not be read as if it were on a par with scripture, even though there may be parts that are full of truth, and there may be words that are attributed to Enoch as quoted in Jude. Now, that being said, if you want a perspective of how influential this type of thinking was, there is the book by Michael Heiser. We did an interview on it last year, Reversing Hermon, Hermon, where he talks about the larger spiritual issues and the spiritual fall that's being addressed in Enoch, and that he believes was an issue in the early church, that Jesus fixed things on earth, but also in the cosmos. So that book you'll find to be very insightful as well. Michael Heiser's Reversing Hermon, Enoch, The Watchers, and The Forgotten Mission of Jesus Christ. Even if you don't agree with all of Dr. Heiser's arguments, you'll have to see that this type of thinking was certainly current in New Testament times, as reflected especially in 2 Peter and in Jude. All right, let's go to the next question. Cameron, what relationship, if any, does the Christian have to the blessings of Deuteronomy 28? I've heard it preached that we get in on those blessings, and I've heard the idea be completely dismissed. I don't want to miss out or have false faith for something that isn't mine. Thank you, Dr. Brown. You the man. Well, thank you, Cameron. All right. This is actually not as easy an issue to address directly as you might think. First, this was given to Israel on a national level. And if Israel was to obey the Lord, Israel as a nation would be blessed, would be the head, would not the tail, would prosper, would loan to others rather than being in debt, would be blessed with health and longevity, etc. If Israel disobeyed, and this you have Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28 parallels there. If Israel disobeyed, horrific curses would come on the nation. So on the one hand, this was national and not simply individual. That's the first thing. The second thing, it was part of the Sinai covenant. So in short, Christians are not under the Sinai covenant, but under a new and better covenant. If we were under the Sinai covenant, we'd be putting people to death if they broke the seventh-day Sabbath. If we were under the Sinai covenant, we would burn a witch, practicing witch. If we were under the Sinai covenant, we'd be practicing every new moon, etc. We'd be still going to a temple and offering sacrifices. We're not under the Sinai covenant. And God is dealing with us as individual believers in the midst of a fallen and sinful world. That being said, if a nation was to adhere more closely to God's standards, was to walk in generosity to the needy, was to uphold moral principles on an ethical level before God, was to turn away from idols and worship the one true God, I believe that God would bless us nationally, just as all kinds of sin would bring judgment nationally. So for any nation on the planet, not under the Sinai covenant, I believe many of those principles, not covenantally, but by the nature of God and by sowing and reaping, would still apply. And we know Proverbs 14:34, a universal truth, righteousness exalts a nation, sin is a reproach to any people. So if America followed biblical, compassionate principles internationally and locally, I believe we would be more blessed as a nation, even if we were not a totally, quote, Christian nation. And to the extent we turned away from those things, I believe that we would be judged either by sowing and reaping or by God being actively involved. But what about us as individual believers? Didn't Jesus promise us tribulation? Didn't he promise us persecution? Didn't he say that the world would treat us the way the world treated him? Yes, that's true. And therefore, there is no guarantee that if you follow Jesus and honor him, that you'll be financially prosperous, that you won't get put in jail for your faith, that you won't come under certain demonic attack and things like that. On the flip side, I believe that the new covenant does renew promises of physical health as a covenantal blessing under the new covenant. I do believe that in terms of financial principles, that we still do reap what we sow, and as we sow generously, we reap generously. So not under a Sinai covenant, but under divine principles that are reinforced and reiterated in the New Testament and therefore in the new covenant. And that spiritually, even if we're being persecuted, even if we're put out of our homes for the gospel, even if we're put in jail for the gospel, that we can confess spiritually that every need we have is met in Jesus, that we can confess spiritually that we are the head and not the tail, meaning even if we are cast out by the world, hated by the world, rejected by the world, scorned by the world, we are blessed and favored by God. So there is, in a sense, a spiritual application of everything in the law, but we're no longer under the Sinai covenant. Therefore, my answer is a bit more nuanced than a simple yes or no. Okay, let's see here. Joshua, good afternoon, brother. My question is in regards to the topic of self-defense. As you see in the news, both in the U.S. and around, as you see on the news, both in the U.S. and around, are ever increasing. So something's ever increasing. I guess a word was missed there. I also remember from your Jewish Objection series that your stance on the Lord's teaching, for example, turn the other cheek, was not calling for passivity. I would like to hear your case for self-defense as allowed in Scripture. I ask because I don't see Paul or other gospel writers calling for self-defense. I would be corrected if I'm wrong. Okay, let's put this in three categories. Category one, what did Jesus mean when he said, turn the other cheek? Category two, what if we're persecuted for the gospel? Category three, what about self-defense in general? Category one, turn the other cheek, is talking about personal retaliation. It is not talking in context about if someone, say, breaks into your home in the middle of the night, and let's say you, sir, Joshua, let's just say theoretically, you had a baseball bat in your bedroom just in case there was ever a house invasion, or you were licensed to carry legally, gun owner, and someone breaks into your house and is going to try to kill your wife and children. Do you have the Christian right to defend yourself? Well, there's zero in the Bible telling you not to. Zero in the Bible telling you that you shouldn't watch over your family or protect them. So the teaching of Jesus in Matthew 5 has to do with legal retaliation under the law, or an attitude of retaliation, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Rather, if someone gives you a backhanded slap, so they slap you on the right cheek, so a right-handed person, that's a backhanded slap, that would entitle you to a fine for publicly being shamed. Yeah, fine, go ahead, hit me on the other cheek. That's the attitude in terms of personal retaliation, trying to hurt someone else in a retaliatory way. As far as persecution for the gospel, no, you don't find Paul, the apostles, when they were being arrested by the government for the gospel, trying to fight back physically and kick people away and pull out a gun and shoot. So in that sense, if I'm persecuted for the gospel, I bless, I don't curse. And if I can flee for safety, fine. Now, it's another issue, though, if you have an armed conflict. Maybe you're living in a country and you are being invaded by enemies. They're trying to kill all the Christians. You have an army that can fight back. Again, I look at that as a different category. But personal retaliation, or trying to defend myself, fight somebody, take them out if I'm being persecuted for the gospel, no, that's a different category. But self-defense in itself, why not? It's a righteous, good thing in many cases.